Philip Dirk, thank you, goedenavond. Nederlands voor mij is niet gemakkelijk, heel moeilijk. En ik heb zoveel respect voor de schoonheid van uw taal dat ik niets meer ga zeggen in het Nederlands. I've been in Belgium 3.5 years, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday French, Tuesday, Thursday Dutch. And if I tried to do this in Dutch, you would not be happy. But I really enjoy studying the language. It is really a pleasure to be here tonight to meet with all of you, the distinguished alumni of the newly branded Vlerick Business School. Some of you may know that I attended Columbia University undergraduate and then Harvard Law School. And I remember while at Harvard, some of the Harvard business students sitting around and referring to themselves as the Vlerick of the West. You weren't too sure. Now, there you go. I wanted tonight perhaps to share some thoughts about the next steps, about tomorrow for Belgium, for America, for our two economies, for our politics, and for the Belgian-American relationship. You see, I have indeed been U.S. ambassador to Belgium for nearly 3.5 years. It's the second longest serving U.S. ambassador to Belgium in 31 years. And if you like to think about government, if you like to think about politics, about economics and economies, can there be two better places to focus on than Belgium and America? You know, the two countries have so much in common. Both countries even adopt dramatic names for their political conflicts. I was really impressed. I thought Belgium had amazing flair and originality when everyone walked around in the country bemoaning and talking about BHV. I thought that name for a political conflict would be hard to top, but leave it to America because we came up with the fiscal cliff. So let's focus first on economics and the economies, then look briefly at the politics, and then finally our relationship. As to America, although we still have a little bit of political cloud cover, and although the skies sometimes seem gray from the smog of politics, I think to a large extent our economy consists of mostly sunny skies. While some people viewed America as suffering from and defined by a 3-year economic crisis, I tended to view that it was a 1-year economic crisis that was largely tackled and from which we've largely recovered. But the success of some of that recovery was masked by 2 years of political stalemate and political crisis. Now, looking back in hindsight, I think our economic crisis consisted largely of 3 problems that were tackled quite a while ago. First, we, along with Europe, had lax financial regulation. And so when the elements of the economy began to falter, when the foundation began to shake, the buildings toppled. America and Europe have long ago responded with significant new financial regulation. Just ask the bankers in this room. And we have shored up those foundations. Second, our housing market, and to some extent our classic industry, had profited from those loose financial regulations to record gains and growth that perhaps were never justified by reality. Some industries, like the auto industry, had never responded to shrinking demand. So we had to go through a painful course correction, the fall of housing prices, the closure and downsizing of businesses, the rise of unemployment. Now, Belgium has focused on the problems of overcapacity at Ford Europe, leading to the closure of the Ford Genk plant. But few realize that long before that problem, Ford had to shed 22% of its U.S. domestic capacity from 2006 to 2009. We, too, long before, had to make those course corrections before we could emerge on the other side and begin the ascent once again. But we did that, too, solve that problem, or largely solve that problem, too, relatively quickly. The third problem, the one that then appeared at the time of the crisis to be structural, the one that appeared to be most difficult to overcome, or particularly in the short run, was our dependence on foreign oil and our runaway energy costs. We were borrowing from the Chinese and paying $800 million a day to buy fossil fuels from around the globe, not always from people who are our best friends, with lots of damaging costs. One result was very costly energy. But in so doing, we were at once undermining our national security. We were losing all opportunity to create job growth in any energy sector of our own. We were watching our carbon footprint soar, and with it, the anger of our allies, particularly here in Europe. And potentially, we were putting the last nail in the coffin of American manufacturing, since the addition of high energy costs to a relatively high labor cost often created a hurdle too high for ingenuity and efficiency to overcome. Now, we've largely overcome and solved that third set of problems as well. Maybe on that one we were lucky. We found out we were sitting on a game-changing energy source of natural gas. Or maybe we were good in learning how to frack our way to securing a new energy supply. You know, sometimes you have to be good enough to know when you're lucky. Either way, by turning to the natural gas that we had long stood on but could not previously secure, and by making significant progress in the techniques surrounding fracking and obtaining the gas, we have reduced our dependence on foreign oil just since the time I've been here in 2009 from 64% to 47%. And between now and 2020, we will become the largest energy producer in the world, and we will be a net exporter of energy. And because natural gas is only 50% of the carbon footprint, we have reduced our carbon footprint more than any country in the world, including any Kyoto country. And manufacturing is coming home. Manufacturing is coming back as cheaper energy costs are restoring a competitive advantage against countries that so long boasted cheaper labor costs. So what's been the result of tackling the three problems in our house? How sunny are our skies? Well, plainly, we still have a ways to go, and as the fiscal cliff and the debt ceiling disputes demonstrate, our democracy, while always worth the price, is never that easy. But still, the crisis saw unemployment in my country soar from its usual 4.9% to 10.1%, and threatening to go much, much higher. And as of today, we have increased private sector jobs 33 months in a row, and that unemployment has fallen from 10.1% now to 7.7%. That crash in housing prices of a couple of years ago, that's been followed by the excitement of recovery. U.S. housing prices in October registered a 6.3% increase since the same time last year. We've seen some markets, like Arizona, with prices rising over 20%. October 2012 marked the 8th consecutive month of housing prices rising year on year. And it's not just Americans that are moving back into the housing market. Non-American buyers accounted for $82 billion in home sales in the U.S. last year, of which the Chinese alone accounted for $7 billion. In the years after I arrived, in 2009 and 2010, Belgians would always come up to me, and they'd say, Mr. Ambassador, where should I invest? What should I buy? And without fail, I always used to respond that they ought to buy the whole state of Florida. Everything was at bargain prices. Now, it's still worth to buy. America is still a great place to invest. But the day of the steel deal is quickly fading as we recover. And because world economies are largely one boat, we either rise together or fall together, our recovery has aided Europe and Belgium. Belgian exports to the U.S. this year are up over 40%. Yet, as I noted, the recovery has been slowed somewhat by our deep political divisions and the lack of a consensus. Before moving here, I used to wonder how well the U.S. could do if we didn't have political divisions. If we were a politically unified country where all believed in the same fundamental policies. If, for example, instead of dividing 51% to 49%, as in our last election, instead of dividing 51% to 49% between Democrats and Republicans, or between left and right, what if 98% of our country all supported, for example, President Obama, and if every minister in our country agreed with him? What if an entire country supported health care, a woman's rights to choose, the importance of fighting climate, and the importance of a transatlantic relation? I wondered what such an extremely politically unified country would look like. And then I got my answer. If all that were to be happen, it would be called Belgium. So I learned that no matter how big or how small your country, no matter how substantively unified you are, or actually at least appear to be to outsiders looking in, the greatness of democracy is also always its biggest challenge. Find just two people, and we will have two opinions. And two opinions always will make progress, particularly economic progress, slower than one. But you have to love a country where 50,000 people out of just 11 million run in October for political office. You have to run a country where every town is plastered with posters of contenders for office so that you can no longer see the road signs, and where it took 541 days to form a government among a group of leaders who all then said that in my country they would have all belonged to the same party. And you have to similarly value a country like mine, where a single presidential debate can keep everyone in the country and many in the world talking for weeks. So if you have any doubt about the greatness of our admittedly economically inefficient democracies, about the greatness of Belgium last October, or the greatness of the United States last November, just compare those months and the selection of our new leaders that occurred at those times to what occurred in countries around the same time where democracy is but a future dream. There is no BHV or fiscal cliff in those countries, but the citizens would relish having such issues. As to the economy ahead, here in Belgium, I don't have any answers, and it is certainly not for me to make the choices. But I at least see some of the issues that lie ahead. And so Belgium will have its choices. First, the economic news here is largely good. While Europe generally faces slow growth times ahead, Belgium is at least near or at the front of the pack. There are businesses like dredging companies screaming for more engineers, and areas of the country where help wanted signs still cannot be filled. But with a growing, diverse population, there are some urban areas with high unemployment, particularly among youth and younger age groups. And so on my visits to cities and villages, to governors, many mayors and governors have asked me about help in bringing American businesses, perhaps focusing on restaurants and retail that could help with unskilled labor employment. In fact, my first job when I was 16 was as a dishwasher. And when they ask about help in bringing unskilled labor jobs to meet that 30% youth unemployment in some cities, my job is to help double U.S. exports around the world and in Belgium, so the mission is consistent with my role here. Bring American businesses that could double the exports and help employ unskilled labor. So I wrote to nearly 100, dozens and dozens, nearly 100 U.S. franchise restaurants and retail businesses that are already based in many countries around the world, and wrote to them about expanding to Belgium. But the effort has been difficult. It is in this area, not in engineers for dredging companies or in those geographic areas where the help wanted signs are. It's in this area where high labor costs make such business openings and job creation difficult. I've checked both with Starbucks and with Le Pain Quotidien, and the numbers are roughly the same. For an hour of labor for someone working at a Starbucks or a Le Pain Quotidien, all in with all costs counted per hour. An hour of that labor in the US costs a little under 10 euros. In the UK, it's 12 euros. In the Netherlands, it's 15 euros. And in Belgium, it's 24 euros. In Moscow, unemployment is under 2%, in large part because stores are open 7 days a week and often till 10 or 11 at night. I recently visited a mall in Warsaw that rivaled or surpassed anything I had seen in the US and was far different than anything I've seen in Belgium, with hundreds and hundreds of modern stores, both US and European, dozens of restaurants, a huge cinema with 15 or 20 screens, open 7 days a week for long hours. So in getting ready for the speech, I asked my commercial officer to get me the name of the mall I was thinking of that met that description. And it turned out there are 3 such malls in Warsaw that fit that description. Now, Belgium is doing just fine without US restaurants or retail and without gleaming Polish malls or long retail hours. But the choices are ahead. It might be able to find creative solutions for some of the labor challenges it faces by adopting some of these or other approaches to the Belgian context. Okay, having looked at our economy on both sides of the Atlantic and politics on both sides of the Atlantic, what about our relationship and our roles in the world in going forward? After 3.5 years here, I have discussed often, but believe more than ever, in the importance of Belgium, in the credibility of Belgium, and in the need for Belgium to be part of the voices among the world leadership. Now, I've often said over the past 3.5 years, there are many wonderful countries in Europe, but too often other countries, particularly Europe North and Europe South, tend to speak past one another. Some countries sometimes speak simply to be heard, and sometimes with predictable tones and predictable messages. But Belgium is different. Belgium speaks past no one, but to and with each one. Belgium never speaks simply to hear itself be heard. When Belgium does speak, it does so for only one reason. It has something to say. Though smaller and perhaps with less total wealth than some, Belgium is, therefore, I believe, a leader in credibility. And credibility is the most powerful force for persuasion, and persuasion is the most powerful tool in diplomacy. And as the seat of the EU and NATO, Belgium also has a stage, when it so desires, and a podium from which it can speak to many, many others. And together, credibility and a central pulpit combine to make a potentially very powerful voice. So believing always in the power of Belgian credibility, our embassy website for the past 3 years has urged, quote, if you want to be heard, say it in Belgium. And as you know, Europe often takes steps to confirm my view, picking Herman Van Rompuy to lead the European Council, recently naming Steven Van Acker as the most credible finance minister in Europe at a time when credibility and finance are critical components. Now, truth be told, as I said such things in the past 3+ years, Belgians sometimes question whether we're sincere in our belief. Are we just saying that? But now that 3 years has passed, history has removed much of that doubt. Belgium has been heard often. Belgium's been heard about Afghanistan. In 2010, President Obama asked for surge troops for Afghanistan, promising to foster civilian reconstruction and stability, and promising to draw down on troop levels when conditions permitted us to do so. While other allies struggled, go back and look and see what happened to nearby governments, Belgium responded favorably. It went in with additional troops, and it indeed has supported NATO's efforts to begin the transition to Afghan-led security effort, and Belgium has come out as we've come out. While some other new leaders have announced the complete withdrawal of all troops from Afghanistan this year, the new Belgian government announced that Belgium will remain side by side with America, side by side with those at the NATO table, as we initiate the transition through 2014. And then when we sought pledges for the post-2014 financial support to the Afghan security effort, Belgium responded with the full amount of the pledge that was asked of it. When human rights were at risk in Libya, Belgium helped lead, flying 620 air-to-ground bombing missions in Libya, while the United States, after the initial effort, flew no air-to-ground bombing missions once the main coalition started. Instead, we rearmed our allies and refueled our allies, while allies, 6 countries, including Belgium, put their pilots in harm's way in defense of the citizens of Libya, as those citizens demanded democracy and their human rights. Belgium's been heard about Iranian sanctions, closing the port of Antwerp to Iranian state shipping lines and denying the regime in Tehran access to its financial system. Belgium's been heard on the need for compromise and action in the Eurozone crisis. Belgium's been heard time and time again. And we, the United States and Belgium, have fixed our problems of the past. We've gotten by our rough patches and today form the strongest of partners. We have progress and we have momentum. Of course, we had the strongest roots of a relationship as dear allies and partners, roots dating back to 2 world wars. The liberation of Belgium by the United States and our allies after the devastation of 2 world wars is and will always remain a preeminent and unifying part of our joint history. And I shall always be moved by the fact that Belgians never forget, by the fact that today they still gather at the Menin Gate for the last call every night, that today all of the American graves have been adopted by Belgians of boys who died over a half-century ago, but flowers are still brought today. Now, particularly because of how deep and how strong our roots are, the yesterday that existed when Michelle and I arrived here in Belgium over about 4 years ago, the yesterday that preceded that time, the yesterday of the mid-2000s, that's a place from which we may learn a great deal about foreign relations, but to which we should never return. You see, despite our history as the dearest of allies and our bonds that followed the 2 world wars, in that point, the mid-2000s, the relationship between the United States and Belgium was widely described in the press as being frosty. As a result of policy differences, particularly over the handling of the Iraq War, the Belgian government seriously considered closing the port of Antwerp to U.S. ships, closing Belgian airspace to U.S. planes, and subjecting U.S. officials to its law of criminal jurisdiction for criminal charges in Belgium of indicting senior U.S. leadership in Belgium for actions in Iraq. So however the U.S. and Belgium got so far off track with each other, the U.S. had faltered in the minds and in the hearts of the citizens of Belgium. We had separated from the people. And indeed, the Gallup polling company started in 2007 to track public opinion in every country in the world concerning their view of America and U.S. leadership. And the results of that first poll showed that in Belgium in 2007, only 8% of the citizens had a favorable view of U.S. leadership, and 65% had an unfavorable view, with 27% neutral or no opinion. Think about that. 8% favorable and 65% unfavorable. 8 to 1 times as unfavorable as favorable. Could there be a greater call for change? Could there have been a greater call for renewed leadership, for rebuilding a partnership? And it's not about, and was never about, a popularity contest. It's always about results. When citizens are frosty and cynical, politicians then threaten to close ports and airspace. In that world of cynicism and mistrust, in that environment, both American interests of any sort and the Belgian-American relationship suffered mightily. Expat Americans had to feel at least somewhat uncomfortable amidst their neighbors. Tourists in that environment hide their T-shirts that say Boston Red Sox or identify them as Americans, and they carry their guidebooks face down. And in those days, in that environment, U.S. businesses played down their U.S. roots, and an embassy often found frustration behind many doors. Indeed, diplomacy often remained stale at the door. In that yesterday, we had lost our way with one another. We talked past each other. We failed to look each other in the eye. So we cannot go back there again. That yesterday must always continue to fade as tomorrow grows ever brighter. We should not return to that yesterday, no matter who leads Belgium, no matter who leads the United States, no matter what result in an October or in November, certainly no matter who the ambassador, no matter whether he studies French and Dutch daily and tries to build a friendship with the Belgian people by visiting every city, village, or commune, or alternatively, whether he spends more time at the embassy and is less known to the public. But the path of change was as identifiable back then as the path of destruction had been, and it almost always is. You just need to identify the causes and react with the solutions. When we first arrived in 2009, we candidly admitted that the Belgian-American relationship had recently suffered, and I explained the values of the then new president, the man who had sent me here. We promised to be better listeners, better learners, and to rebuild the partnership where it had suffered most with the people. We outlined our plans back in 2009 as part of the reconstruction of that bridge with the citizens of Belgium to study both French and Dutch and to visit all of the people, to visit the 589 cities, villages, and communes in Belgium. Now, the election of Barack Obama and the appointment of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State in the beginning of 2009 took us a long way to rebuilding that bridge. They were, for Belgium, more than a catalyst for change. They were the embodiment of change. The Gallup poll, that same poll that I told you about in 2007, the Gallup poll in 2009 showed that the change in leadership had raised the favorability rating from 8% to 30%, a 22% rise in favorability. And more importantly, it had cut the unfavorability from 65% down to 23%, a 42% decrease in unfavorability. So that rating as of 2009 was 30% favorable, 23% unfavorable. We have to date worked hard to continue to reap change, to rebuild the Belgian-American relationship. We've worked hard as a country, as an embassy, and even as an ambassador. We still study French one day and Dutch the next. And we have to date visited 584 cities, villages, and towns, leaving me 5 to go. 4 of them are kind of spread out, but Vuren will be last. Now, the latest Gallup poll of all the countries in the world on their view of U.S. and U.S. leadership came out May 1st of this year, May 1st, 2012. And the Eurozone crisis and perhaps Afghanistan fatigue contributed to the favorability of the United States losing ground in much of Europe. But we've been proud to note that in that same international poll released by Gallup in May, 7 months ago, Belgium finished first in the entire world with the highest gain in its favorability rating for U.S. leadership. There was another 16% gain in favorability and another decrease in unfavorability. So that rating that was 865 just 5 years ago now stands at 46% favorable, 22% unfavorable, a more than 2-to-1 edge in favorability, where a 1-to-8 ratio of unfavorability once stood, which means if you think about different ways, Belgians view American leadership perhaps more favorably than Americans view American leadership, or Belgians view Belgian leadership. And again, this was never about a popularity contest. With the change in public opinion came the change in action that we've talked about, among other places in Afghanistan, in Libya, and the other advances we discussed. Rebuild a partnership, and they will come. And the change also means that you'll see more Boston Red Sox or New York Yankees T-shirts in the Grand Place. Guidebooks of tourists are now carried face up, not face down. Tourists are proud to meet Belgians and to talk about their country. It means that expats proudly refer to their home. U.S. headquartered businesses in Belgium recruit employees and attract new customers by flagging their U.S. roots, not by avoiding them. And the embassy often finds smiles, not frustration at the door, which is usually wide open for the diplomacy of discussion among partners. And yet, I learned never to be too confident, never to stop communicating and working on mutual understanding. For we still sometimes talk past one another, and often the fault for that communication gap is mine. Sometimes it's about how much we value Belgian credibility and Belgian leadership. We had one such example just 2 weeks ago involving the Palestinian request for observer status at the UN. We, the United States, thought Belgium should abstain and help to lead Europe to vote to abstain. And truth be told, we believed for good cause right to the end that Belgium would do so. But on the day of the vote, Belgium decided otherwise and cast a ballot for membership. Now, though many in the press did not so state, the issue concerning the Belgian vote never really was about Palestinian UN membership. You see, whether or not Belgium abstained, whether or not Belgium helped lead Europe into abstaining as a group, the vote was going to be to admit the Palestinians. And though many in this press also did not so state, the issue of membership was not really about how to help the Palestinians or the peace process. Because after viewing the history of tactical advances and efforts by either side, and without doubt after viewing the prior vote last year on admitting the Palestinians to UNESCO and its aftermath, there was really no doubt that the vote in favor of membership would hurt the Israelis, but it would also hurt even worse the Palestinians, and even more so, be a devastating blow to the peace process. You see, we've learned through history and knew fairly to a certainty that tactical efforts by one side would be met by tactical counter-ray responses by others, and would always divert from forcing both sides to meet in true negotiations aimed at a long-term peace. So it was not a surprise that the result of such tactical efforts by the Palestinians would be paired by a tactical counter-response, the announcement of new settlements and the withholding of tax revenues from Palestinians to pay amounts long due to Israelis, which leaves both people far worse off, and the peace process, the only meaningful path there, even more distant than before. So although the media and some political leaders analyze the issue only from the perspective of Israel or of the Palestinians, lost in the discussion was the focus on Belgium and Belgium's heretofore role as a credible force in the Middle East working towards that long-term peace. You see, recognizing Belgium's credibility with both parties, I had seen U.S. leaders meet with the then Belgian foreign ministers on several occasions in the past to coordinate voices in our overtures and our efforts with both the Israelis and the Palestinian leadership. An abstention vote would not have hurt the Palestinians or helped the Israelis. It would instead have preserved Belgium's role as a credible interlocutor in the Middle East and a credible force for peace. And in that vote, as in every vote, I believe in that Belgian credibility, and I will never sell Belgium short. So with that issue in the rearview mirror, there will be other issues that will raise difficult choices, but for which a Belgian vote to remain among the credible world leaders may be difficult, may be expensive, but will certainly be worth the cost or the challenge. As Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands and the UK have made efforts to update their Air Force by buying new F-35s, never an easy decision and even more difficult in the time of budget squeezes, Belgium is considering the issue still, whether to update its Air Force, whether to buy new planes. It's far too easy for some to say, why does Belgium need new planes? But I believe whatever plane Belgium ultimately chooses, an F-35, an American, or something else, Belgium needs to maintain an equally modern military and deserves its voice as a small but reliable partner in NATO, whether in protecting human life in Libya or fostering civilian reconstruction in Afghanistan, a voice among the leaders. And there's more to do in combating terrorism, in preventing Hezbollah from contributing to the atrocities being committed in Syria. The United States has designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization and believes others should do so as well, in part for its material support of Assad's regime, support which has contributed to the slaughter of over 30,000 Syrian civilians. Belgium has been a strong voice in condemning the human rights violations of the Assad regime and can help raise awareness of Hezbollah's role in these atrocities by joining us in the condemnation. Again, at a cost, again, at a challenge. There'll be many, many more issues. On the leading issues of the day, Belgium can help others who have to decide as well. I, for one, believe in nothing less. Now, as for our plans, we've been here now 3.5 years. I will continue to duck as much as I can, but eventually Washington will find me, maybe this summer. So we'll probably head back, I would hope, to continue consulting, joining boards, working on projects, whoever calls, between Belgium and the United States. But wherever Michelle and I go, we will always carry a part of Belgium in our heart. Thanks so much, and all the best.